This is what would happen if you were to double your protein intake. Now, I'm not talking to someone that's already eating 200 grams of protein going to 400 grams of protein, but I'm talking about just a general rule of thumb. If you're eating the recommended daily allowance of protein and you were to double it, this is what would happen. And I'm not going to be just all sunshine and rainbows. I am going to talk about some of the negative things that could happen too, because we've got to be really real here. But let's focus on what is mostly there, which is mostly positive stuff. So first off, you might actually increase muscle, even if you don't change your workout a whole lot. And I know that sounds like, okay, well, that's kind of obvious. You're eating more protein. You might not double the amount of muscle mass that you put on, but there was a study that was published in Nutrition Reviews that looked at 105 papers, 105 different bodies of literature with over 5,400 participants in randomized controlled trials, good literature. They found that there was flat out a dose-dependent relationship with the amount of protein that was consumed and the amount of muscle protein synthesis and ultimately muscle mass that was built. But it wasn't specifically 2x. So doubling your protein isn't going to double your muscle mass, but doubling your protein is definitely going to, or you can safely say, will strongly suggest that you're going to build more muscle. But we have to look at another really, really interesting paper that was published in Physiology Reports. This is very interesting because they took a look at people that had low levels of lean body mass, so low levels of muscle, and people that had high levels of lean body mass, so a lot of muscle. And they had them consume either 20 grams of protein after a workout or double that, 40 grams of protein after a workout. What's wild is there were no significant differences between the group that had low amounts of lean body mass or high amounts of lean body mass. They both responded the same way. And you know how they responded? More muscle protein synthesis and more overall muscle building with double the protein. And it was the same effect whether they had a lot of muscle on them or they had a little bit of muscle on them. I see this as really good news because there's a lot of people that will say, I don't want to double my protein intake, or I don't want to increase more protein because I just don't have that much muscle mass. Well, it looks as though the overall benefit that you get is going to be good whether you have a little bit of muscle or a lot of bit of muscle. But we also need to start looking at timelines here because things are important. Is there an actual limit to how much you could say absorb at one sitting, particularly with like a faster acting protein post-workout? Well, with this, there's very strong literature suggesting that it does matter. The study was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. It is one of my favorite bodies of research. It's a really interesting paper because they had people get up in the morning, eat a high protein breakfast, and then work out. After the workout, they had them consume either 0 protein, 10 grams of protein, 20 grams of protein, or 40 grams of protein. Okay? What they found with this was that the 20 gram protein group had an increase in muscle protein synthesis 49% above the 0 group, right? So there was definitely, obviously, a difference between 20 grams of protein and 0 grams. But when they had 40 grams, they only had a 56% increase in muscle protein synthesis. So it was like not that much more having 40 grams than it was having 20 grams. Well, at that rate, you're looking at this and you're saying, well, there goes that. Like, what's the point in doubling my protein if I'm only getting another 7% improvement for all that money I'm spending on protein? Well, the speed of digestion matters. It's long been wondered how much whey protein we could consume in one sitting because it absorbs so fast that the amount of protein that is going, amino acids going into your bloodstream at one time is so much that the body can only handle so much, so a lot might get oxidized. And that's what we found in this paper. The 40 gram group had a lot that was oxidized. Now, certain demands might increase this more, yada, yada. There's nuance there. But what's really interesting is that there's another paper that came out at the end of 2023 that noted that you could have up to 100 grams of protein, maybe more, and absorb and utilize all of it after a workout. What gives? Which one's right? Well, this is where nuance is important. Whey protein absorbs very fast. The 2023 study was looking at milk protein and casein protein, which digests very slow. What we've learned from this is that slower digesting protein, you can eat 100 grams of it, and you're going to continue to digest it and absorb it and have muscle protein synthesis throughout the remainder of the day. But it's not going to happen right after the workout, whereas whey protein is going to happen right after the workout. So there is a limit to how much you can have in one sitting if it's really fast acting. So if you have more than 25 or 30, 35 grams of whey protein after a workout, there's a line of diminishing return. But if you were to have whey protein so you get your quick fix and then have some meat or even casein protein, that would really work well. I am really pumped to talk about a really cool way to get some protein in if you like meat. This is a new sponsor on my channel that I'm pumped about because finally this thing exists. It's called Just Meats. This is conveniently packaged, restaurant quality, already cooked meat. So we're talking like ground beef that tastes like it's coming from a really nice Mexican food restaurant, but it's good, ethically sourced, it's grass-fed, it's grass-finished. I am not kidding. I have literally not been this excited to have a new sponsor on this channel in a long time because this is what I've been looking for. It comes to you, it's delivered in an insulated package, in an insulated box. You put it in your fridge, but it's already good to go. So you pop it open, you can eat it straight up. So for me, I can just get ground beef, I can get grilled chicken, I can get herb roasted chicken, I can get whatever, I get pulled pork and get my extra protein in a delicious way that I don't have to cook at all. And I'm a fan of usually cooking ground beef anyway because like ground beef's easy. But even sometimes I don't have 10 minutes to cook up a skillet of ground beef. This makes it super duper easy, especially when I'm on the go, but also just like for the family, when I come home and we don't feel like actually having to cook a bunch of meals, I can just warm up some pulled pork and then have some like siete tortillas and make a taco, and that's dinner. It's that simple. So if you're trying to increase your protein intake and you're pressed for time, you're a busy person, I am not kidding when I say this is like taking prepackaged meat that you might find at a grocery store and elevating it, I would safely say 5 or 6-fold. It's not like getting your protein through deli meat. This stuff is delicious. And that link down below using code Thomas15 is a 15% off discount link. Yes, this is a sponsored mention of them, but it is something I am legitimately gospel truth using because it is awesome. So that link, top line of the description underneath this video. The next thing you might notice if you 2x your protein, you're gonna sleep better. And there's strong evidence published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Check out this study. 12 weeks, they had people consume either 10%, 20%, or 30% of their calories from protein. They found in dose-dependent fashion, when they measured what is called the Global Sleep Score, the GSS, clear as day, the more the protein intake, the better the sleep score. And that's over a course of 12 weeks. But there was a second arm to this study that was a 16-week study that looked at like total amount of protein per pound of body weight. So they started at a typical 0.8 gram per kilogram, which is super low, and they went upwards from there. In the beginning, they all started with similar sleep scores. By the end of the 16 weeks, the group that had the highest protein intake had a 32% better sleep score than those that had the lower protein intake. And if they were in a caloric deficit and had the increase in protein, it was the most improvement. So what this means is that if you are cutting calories, your sleep is probably getting jeopardized. And if you were to add protein in, it can dramatically improve your sleep. Like we're talking 32%. That's a huge improvement above people that weren't consuming a lot of protein. This is where it gets kind of weird because some of the mechanisms we have to get fringy with. There is something called a neuropeptide. And we've seen this in fruit fly data that when protein intake is increased, this neuropeptide in the brain is particularly increased. And this decreases arousal while you're sleeping. So it decreases the risk of you sort of being aroused and waking up. Now, from a survival mechanism, like this kind of makes sense, right? From that standpoint, like if you're starving, you're not getting enough protein, your body might be on higher alert, so you're not sleeping as well because you're looking for food. But then we look at a study that was published in Cell that was done on mice, and it outlines it pretty clear. Again, it's rodent model stuff, but we're connecting dots a little bit after we looked at the big human research. So in mice, they found that the higher the protein intake, the lesser the response to stimulus at night. So you ever like be laying in bed and like this happens to me, I'll be laying in bed and my dog will shake and and his collar will go clink, 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 clink. And it's like, I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, like burglars are here, and like grab my stick, right? And then I'm like, that was my response to the stimulus, was almost like overreactive. But then I have those nights like where I feel like I'm well fed, I'm well nourished, and like something wakes me up and I'm like, oh, what was that? Okay, back to sleep. We've all experienced those two sides of the coin. This is what I compare it to. It's like when you're adequately fed with protein, you're less responsive to stimulus. Here's another really interesting one though. When I talk about recovery, people think sleep. No, recovery for me is my ability to get into the gym or play outdoors or whatever with the same effectiveness as I did yesterday. And protein can actually improve your recovery so you can keep doing the same thing. It's not just repairing. It actually could physically recover you better. There was a study that was published in Nutrients that flat out looked at the 24-hour recovery period in subjects that had varying levels of protein after a workout. So we know protein after a workout will help you repair. But what we didn't realize, or I didn't realize, is that 24 hours later, even if it's a fast digesting protein, 24 hours later, muscle protein breakdown rates were lower, indicating that recovery was significantly better. Meaning if I were to go play flag football with my kids and beat my body up and then have some protein, I would have a higher chance of being able to perform at equal, possibly even better performance that day than I was the day before. That is important, especially as we get older and we just want to feel continuously good. Now, what about for us trying to lose some weight? This is where it's really cool. The side effect of increasing your protein intake is you will probably lose less overall muscle and lose more as a percentage of fat. So this study was published in FASEB journal. It's one of my favorite papers as well because I love stuff on protein. Okay, for 21 days, there's a kind of a period before there where they did a particular diet, then a maintenance, but I'm gonna cut right to the chase here. 21 days where they put them in a 40% caloric deficit. That's a serious deficit. And then they had them at varying levels of protein. What they found at the end of this study was that they all lost about the same amount of weight over this 3-week period of time. But in a dose-dependent fashion, the more protein that was consumed, the more muscle was preserved. In fact, almost all the muscle was preserved in the highest protein group, but they lost the same amount of weight as the low protein group, indicating that the actual percentage of fat that was burned as weight was significantly more in the protein group. So if you have 10 pounds lost here and 10 pounds lost here, but this 10-pound group lost a bunch of muscle too, they didn't lose as much fat. If this group lost 10 pounds, but they didn't lose any muscle, pretty much all 10 pounds was fat. That's a pretty awesome side effect. But now let's get to real side effects. Bad breath is a real thing when you increase your protein intake. The good news is there's an adaptation and your body adjusts to it. But a lot of times when people do consume additional protein, there is sort of an ammonia byproduct. And that can make you kind of have a sweetish kind of smell to your breath. It's kind of sweet. And you might notice this if you rapidly increase your protein intake. So what I might suggest you do is maybe increase it incrementally. Maybe 25%, 25%, 25%, 25% until you're double, right? That's a great way to kind of, stop that bad breath sort of thing from happening. There's not a lot of literature on it, like people don't go measure halitosis based on their protein consumption, but we do know mechanistically it can occur. The other thing that we have to remember is that protein is a diuretic. Okay, and there is a study that was published in the Journal of Dietetic Association that found that urine gravity had increased, as well as, of course, nitrogen, but that's going to come along with consuming more protein, had increased. And when the urine gravity increases, those are typically signs of dehydration. So I'm not saying when you increase your protein intake that you're going to dehydrate yourself, but you do need to know that it does act as a diuretic. The higher your protein intake, you might lose some more water. And eventually this can affect thermogenesis. Eventually this can affect your metabolism. Probably not to any dramatic degree, but if you have other factors that are also dehydrating you, it's something to be aware of. So just be conscious of the fact that if you were to 2x your protein, you probably need to at least 0.5x or add an additional 50% more water. And just be cognizant of that, because the last thing you want to have happen is get dehydrated while you're consuming more protein and then potentially end up constipated. Which leads me to the next one, the gas and the bloating when you first increase protein. And it especially happens with milk proteins and whey proteins. When you start, I don't recommend you just increase your protein by doubling your protein by adding a bunch more whey. Maybe add one more whey shake into the day, but the rest should be coming from good quality protein, like good quality grass-fed beef, some chicken, whatever. All the stuff that I talked about with just meats, which would work really, really well here. Or, cook up your own if you've got the time. But the bottom line with that is, as you increase protein, yeah, you might get some bloating, you might get some gas, you might even get some constipation. So the hydration just becomes exponentially more important, so you don't end up backed up, or you don't end up like, I don't know, pissing off the rest of your family because, well, you know what. So when it comes down to it, I know I have my biases. I am a fan of a higher protein diet. And I look at the literature, I look at Dr. David Sinclair's stuff, I look at the low protein literature too, and I see where there is some merit to it. But at the end of the day, the evidence just seems overwhelmingly strong for a higher protein diet. And as Dr. Rhonda Patrick put it on my channel, and Dr. Gabby Lyon, almost doubling the recommended daily allowance of protein is probably where most people need to be. I'll see you tomorrow.